chair. How's it going?
How's it going? My
Good.
name's Steve.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Have you met Jamie?
Hey, how's it going, Jamie?
There you go.
What's up, man?
Okay, sounds good. Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. Nice. Powerful stuff. Super powerful. So you're live?
We are live.
Streaming right
yep,
now?
chatting with all of our wonderful chatters.
Very cool.
How are you doing tonight?
Can you read that? No, that's pretty fast.
It's kind of like the Matrix. When you've done it long enough, you kind of get used to
Got
seeing
it.
the
Just jumps
code.
out at you.
Yeah. So, how are you feeling about tonight?
I'm stoked to be here.
You're on a panel about. I think it was No, wait. What was it about? Alternative media.
Manipulation by the media.
Manipulation by the media.
Yes.
Media?
Yeah, the media.
I don't think they do.
I beg to differ. I've lived through some things.
A little bit.
I got a few stories.
They talk a little bit of trash sometimes. Sometimes about it.
Yep. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. There's a lot of people here who I obviously know of, have heard of, and have listened to, but haven't met until today. So I think it's going to be a great conversation.
Sounds like it should
Jamie's
be
one
fun.
of those people.
We've just been Instagram friends.
Yes.
Not even through politics.
No.
Through mixed martial arts.
That is how it happened,
It
actually.
was. It
yes,
must have been.
exactly.
Like jujitsu
Yeah.
stuff. And then we just became buddies.
Yeah.
I'll ask a question. Do you think that the rise of independent media is eventually going to correct the mainstream media? Like, is the mainstream media going to have to adjust because independent media is getting so big and people are sick of the mainstream?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because I feel like the mainstream media, even though often, obviously you've got the Rogans of the world and even others who aren't as big as Rogan, who have a much larger viewership and listenership than CNN on an average day of the week.
Right.
But until kind of the perception changes where, the mainstream media is not, they're still driving the headlines
Right.
on a daily basis, whether it's with Washington or whatever else is happening. So I think there's a generational shift and a culture shift that'll take place.
So many people, like my parents' generation, grew up, they didn't think they had to fact check the news.
Yeah.
It was just called
Yeah.
the news.
Yeah,
And they would
exactly.
watch it at dinner and go, this is the thing
Yeah.
that we watch and that is the truth.
Yeah.
And they didn't have to, there wasn't agendas, there wasn't any of that, or at least not that we knew about. And now you just watch it and you just go, I don't know if I can believe any of this.
I'm going to ask both of you a question because
All right.
nobody ever talks about this. I hear a lot of criticisms from the alternative media in regards to the mainstream media for different, whether they've got corporate donors, whether they've got certain political biases. I feel like I never hear the same accusations towards alternative media from alternative media.
Right.
That people are very quick to say something like, oh, CNN is incentivized to show you this thing about the Democratic Party to make you like them. But in some ways, alternative media can have a bunch of bad incentives too, no?
100%.
My view on that is when you look at new media, alternative media, generally, I'm just thinking through my head as you're asking the question, people are pretty transparent about presenting who they are, what their bias is, who they like, who they don't like, kind of what their general approach is. Whereas when you look at the Washington Post, you look at CNN, you look at a lot of these institutions that have historically presented themselves as unbiased journalists.
Right.
I think that's where the criticism comes into play because so often we're seeing now actually you are presenting a very biased view and it's not even necessarily about politicians. It is about specific issues as well and whatever their take on it is.
Yeah, I think two things. I think that the biggest problem is tribalism, right? Whether we're talking about the mainstream media, whether we're talking about independent media, it's this idea that I must defend this thing because my team is defending it on both sides. You'll see liberal podcasters or liberal journalists being like, I guess I gotta be pro the drag queen kid stuff, and you are like, do you want to be pro that? And I don't know the answer. I don't know if it's authentic. I feel like some of it is, but some of it may not be. Same thing happens with the right. Something big conservative happens that, all my conservative friends are in Austin are pro-gay rights, or, it's just like hanging out with my liberal friends until we really get into the nitty-gritty. So I think that's part of it. And then I also think the great thing about, back in the day, the pre-Taylor Lorenz Washington Post or the New York Times, is they had resources. So I also wonder if, as independent media makes more money and they start to be able to hire journalists and fact checkers and do more on the ground reporting, if then it's going to become a competition. Because as much as we like independent journalism, they do still lack that old school muckraking
the rigor of all like the traditional journalistic work, which is like pretty rigorous depending on the type of story that you're investigating.
Yeah. Totally.
And building out those relationships in your institutions, having a guy that you can call that works in the State Department, or having a source in the FBI that you can tap for information.
You need a gritty Mark Ruffalo in a basement that's like not taking guff from the top.
Sure,
whatever that movie was.
But then you look at people like Matt Taibbi on Substack, and people who have come from very different backgrounds, even in journalism, now recognizing, hey, there's so much freedom to be able to do real investigative journalism on a platform like Substack, where you don't have, let's say, an editor who's saying, oh, no, like we can't print that story because we've got a source in this organization, and we'll burn that relationship if you print this investigative
I'm
piece
so glad
on
you
them.
said that. Like, Taibbi and Greenwald, I became friends with them when they were darlings of the left.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the tribalism, because it was under George Bush. I mean, Taibbi was being called the next Hunter S. Thompson. Greenwald was beloved for everything he was doing against Bush and Cheney, and now they're treated like, neocons, essentially.
I think that was one of the things in Matt Taibbi's book, Media Inc., that was so interesting to me. Was he pointed out, much like Washington is very much a bubble that's a popularity contest, so is the media.
Yes.
So if you're the guy like Matt, he's just like, he was always the guy who was kind of the outsider who he wasn't with the cool kids at school.
No.
And he talked about in the book about how, there, I forget which presidential campaign it was, but he was part of the media who was traveling around with candidates on the plane, and then because he's writing monthly pieces for Rolling Stone and not turning things around, he's like, he had the space to observe a lot more of what was going on, and he started reporting on the reporters. And talking about, what they're doing, the conversations they're having, and how they're choosing what stories to run, which ones not to run, what to cover, what not to cover, what candidates they like, which ones they didn't like. And Matt started writing about that, and he was immediately shunned and told, like, bro, you're breaking the cardinal rule. Reporters don't report on reporters.
Right.
Like, how dare you do this? And I thought that was really interesting as we talk about what drives the narrative, or what people are willing to journalists are actually willing to report about. It's just like politics in Washington, where if you go against the grain in journalism, you are shunned, you're not invited to the parties, you are not seen as one of the cool kids.
Which, by the way,
and it's a disincentive
and
for
that's
people who care about that kind of stuff.
That's what true journalism is.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
you spot bullshit and
Yep.
you call it out, and if it's within the ranks, that should make you even more of a celebrated journalist. Like, that is what your job is, to report, not to just, fit in and gossip on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
So, looking at your Twitter over the past couple of days, I saw you tweeted about the Second Amendment stuff for New York that the Supreme Court was ruling on. I didn't see anything about Roe v. Wade. Did you have any opinions or ideas relating to?
Yeah, it's obviously a very sensitive, it's a sensitive issue, and I've never been someone who just like rushes to be the first one to put out a tweet just to be the first one to put out a tweet, and so I'm being really thoughtful before I say anything about this publicly.
Gotcha. So I don't know everybody's positions over time, but I've heard some people say that you're supportive, like the Second Amendment stuff is a little bit surprising. Were you like traditionally kind of?
I've always been supportive of the Second Amendment.
Okay, okay, gotcha.
Okay. We're gun owners, and it's always just been about how do we ensure that we're upholding our Second Amendment rights, and also addressing a lot of the concerns that I think are being raised about keeping communities safe.
So I'm from Nebraska. I like firearms as well. I own a few. But I recognize I'm also a father. Everything that happened in Uvalde was terrible.
Yeah.
What are, like, in your mind, are there any types of concessions that like people on the left and right can make when it comes to certain types of like gun legislation? Like, are red flag laws like an okay idea that conservatives should be okay with? Should people on the left be okay with like giving back things like silencers or like
Here's the problem with this whole issue is there are too few actual real conversations that are happening around it. So you've got, and I get it and I understand why it is, but when you have people who are so locked into their own respective trenches and their approach is like, you're attacking me and my position and I'm attacking you and yours. And so there's no space for even having a conversation at all. And I think that is really the problem. Before you start saying, well, are you for this, are you for that, are you for this, are you for that? Unless we're able to have a dialogue to say, hey, all of us here at this table do not support kids getting slaughtered at school. Like, that's the common ground. And if we start there, then being open to saying, okay, here's a laundry list of maybe like the low-hanging fruit. What are the first steps, the second steps, and the third steps, and then go forward from there. We won't all agree on everything, but to me, that's what has been lacking in this over a long period of time. But that's the only, if we want to make progress, that is the only way that we will get there.
Yeah, so
gotcha.
I live in Texas where everybody has a gun, and I'm afraid to honk my horn, and it's the first time I've hung out with gun owners. And Tim Kennedy invited me to do one of his courses, and I made friends with all of the instructors there at Sheepdog, and they're great. And I asked them that, because on Twitter, essentially, if you are pro-gun after a shooting, just like you were saying, Tulsi, the dialogue is you want kids to die, right? And so I was asking, the staff, I was like, hey, when you guys go on the news, when you go on Fox News or whatever, why aren't you giving... Because you're more of an expert than me, right? Tim Kennedy has shot guns. Tim Kennedy knows how to protect a building, how to lock down a place, how to evacuate people. Why aren't you talking about methods? Why are all the people who are actually trained, as opposed to, all of my like woke friends from Park Slope or whatever who have never shot a gun, why are we talking about it? And what one of their firearms instructors told me is every time he gets asked to go on the news, he is forced to debate, should we take all guns? So him as a representative of the NRA, as a firearms instructor, he doesn't even have an opportunity to talk about tactics because he just has to be like, here are all the reasons you shouldn't take my guns, which by the way kind of makes conservatives look like what I thought when I was like super progressive, you guys would rather play with your toys because of whatever masculinity issues you have, and you don't care about kids dying. But the way the media works, they're automatically put on their heels, whereas like we should be asking them, instead of making them defensive, we should go, hey, what do you think we should do? Period. Because they know a lot more than I know.
Yeah, I think that's always the frustrating part, is it always feels like, it's not just guns, it's every issue. It's abortion too, to where the other side gets strawman to the most absurdist point.
Sure.
Like, where people accuse the right of wanting atomic bombs to kill kids with, and then people accuse the left of wanting to take, firearms away from women trying to protect themselves from rapists, and it just, the conversations are insane. But I never see anybody willing to say like, hey, like, I'll give you this, but like I need to get this in return, or like here's like one thing we can kind of push for. Everybody just wants to be comprehensive and then screw over the other side as much as possible, which is really frustrating.
No, I have a bit about that I'm going to do tonight that's either going to crush or going to get me booed off stage. I think it's going to do well, but it's about all that.
I respect your craft. To be able to go out there and be ready for whatever.
Comedy comes from trauma. That's it. If you're funny, you had a terrible childhood, and I apologize. And that's how I handle things. Well, and that's why I became a political comic too, because I remember people used to be like, oh, were you the class clown? And I'm like, no, the class clown beat the shit out of me and bullied me and called me, like they were so mean. Usually the comedians were the nerdy ones who would write almost as like a defense mechanism. And so, when bad stuff would happen with my mom or family, me and my brothers would gather, and whenever someone made the first joke, and it was always offensive because someone in my family was being carted off in the ambulance or whatever, and we would laugh, then we could sort of deal with the problem. I think it's the same with politics. If I can get a room tonight filled with like Democrats and Republicans to laugh at either my liberal shit or laugh at me making fun of the left, I win, and then we can talk about it afterwards. That's the
point. Comedy I think really is a great way to be able to kind of disarm all of these defenses that we're talking about, and get people just like, oh, like, I guess I can laugh about this, and maybe thinking about it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully, maybe. Chappelle probably doesn't feel that way after that guy tried to attack him on stage.
That is true. Although I still need to get Chappelle famous, so if someone attacks me on stage, I'm rooting for it. I know jiu-jitsu. Hopefully I go viral, and then I'm set, baby.
This is like so toxic. Hopefully you're not thinking this way yet. Do you have the content brain where you're ever thinking like, man, if somebody did try to kill me, I would get like 5 million views. Does your brain ever go to those? Not that you should, of course not. No, okay.
Maybe
I've been in the YouTube world for too long, but sometimes I start to want,
I will say, like, I've dealt with depression enough that, like, I'm fine with it, but I'm not, no, I mean...
You're fine with what?
We're not actually getting killed, jeez.
No.
Oh, man.
Wait, hold on here.
What do we got to be ready for
tonight?
No, it's a bummer. I mean, some of my favorite people, like Bill Hicks or Mitch, like, they got more famous after they died. I'm not millennial enough. I'm right on the cusp. I'm like almost too old to be a millennial. I feel like if I was like 3 years younger, then maybe I'd be like, I'm going to get those views, baby. But no, right now I would like to live. I'm very happy.
Gotcha.
There you go.
In terms of like political camps, I don't know if you're like planning future stuff, so I'm not trying to pigeonhole you or anything. But okay, gotcha. So because like
look how happy she looks.
Yeah,
she's just content.
Yeah. You're kind of like situated awkwardly sometimes between like Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah.
Like, what camp do you feel like you like identify with?
I've always been, I've always lived in my own space. I've always been just a very independent person, and so I don't know if just more people are paying attention now, but it's kind of been one of those things where it's been a point of criticism from critics who say, well, she's an enigma, she's a mystery, but it really comes from that frustration of essentially not kind of just blindly saying, well, fits in this category and this tribe and this team, so I guess I'll just go along with that. And there's some things I've taken some heat for, but to me, it doesn't matter, because I'd rather know whether someone agrees with me or disagrees with me. I can speak as to why I've taken a certain position or why I hold a certain view. It's because I've really thought about it, rather than gone for kind of a quick soundbite.
I've been trying to sit on some of my more emotional questions for when you do my podcast, but I won't be selfish, and I will ask this one, which is, the people who like you will say that's what they like about you, right? But I think what a lot of people don't realize, and this is what I've had to deal with, and it's hard, for as much as you will be revered for not succumbing to tribalism or whatever, that also means that you are disliked by both sides. Yeah. And it's a fucking bummer. Yeah. Where in your head, I'm sure, at least I don't want to, but the way I think, which I assume is similar, is you go, well, this is like the most intellectual honest way to be, right? Where I'm going to question both sides. I'm going to challenge my own beliefs. Maybe I'll evolve. Maybe I'll see this side that's more conservative, this side that's more liberal. In theory, common sense would say that should be applauded. And in reality, it's like you end up getting just twice the shit for it. Yeah. And, it's got to be not tempting like you would do it, but there have certainly been times where I've been like, oh, it would have been easier to sell out on either side. Yeah. Where it just must be so frustrating, where, again, it seems like such common knowledge to like challenge both sides, but it is not beloved.
No. It feels like both sides are so diametrically opposed on a lot of issues that if you won't identify with one, people will assume that you're the antithesis of all of those sides. So if you have like a conservative fan but you won't identify as a Republican, if you haven't made a strong statement, say like on abortion, they'll assume you're pro-choice. Yeah. Or if you haven't made a strong statement on trans kids or trans swimmers or Ukraine or Russia, they instantly ascribe to you like the view of whatever party that they wish you would identify with as having the opposite of it, which I think is a frustrating thing sometimes of being independent is, people feel like you're non-committed to positions.
Yeah, it is a frustrating thing, and the tribalism of one party versus the other is really, it really is more about the team sport rather than it is about leaders who are being very thoughtful about their approach and their positions, and kind of just going like this is what I believe as a Republican, or this is what I believe as a Democrat, and that's why I think it's important for anybody. And there are people who consider themselves Democrats and Republicans who are disruptors, who are saying like, no, hold on a second, because there are issues where you see, the permanent Washington establishment, which includes people from both parties, who are just like hook, line, and sinker all together on, yes, let's go start a new war.
Right.
Let's go and make sure prescription drug companies are still, use the right word here, but basically still
profiting off the death of kids.
Thank you.
I can say it.
Thank
I'm not
you.
as in the public eye.
Thank you. And other, so you've got like the corporatists, and you've got the, establishment media, the establishment Washington, and so that's where once you peel back the layers of depending on what team you're a part of, and you actually start to look at issues, yeah, of course there are some things that are different, but there's a lot of things that are more a part of kind of the problem in Washington than there are about like, hey, how are we actually solving problems for people?
What do you think is the biggest problem in Washington? Like, if you could snap your fingers and get rid of one aspect of our
Ted Cruz.
political system,
What'd you
not
say?
a person, a thing, a concept.
I said Ted Cruz. I was just being an asshole.
Because you're from Texas now, you can say that?
I'm a Texas resident for another week.
Yeah.
I mean, man, we've been talking about it so much, and maybe it's because it's my job, but like, I honestly, the media is so hugely important because, and I'm sure you've experienced this, when you talk to real people, like, I only lived in a political world in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and then a celebrity world in Los Angeles. And then over COVID, I moved to Arizona, and then I moved to Texas. And talking to normal, real people who don't know who Taylor Lorenz is, who don't know the Twitter drama, who like maybe heard a thing, even like the trans swimmer thing. They don't know, man. They just want to like take care of their kids, have a job, have health insurance, not go to war, ideally. My Republican and Democrat friends pretty much agree on a lot more than you would think.
Yeah.
But when you watch the media, it would portray it, or you click on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, as the exact opposite. So that honestly, it's the media, man.
Yeah. Well, I think it's from a kind of broad level. It's, hey, we need people in Washington who are actually there to do their job and serve the people, not themselves.
Yes.
If you're looking at like the practical,
the revolving door shit, and like
the revolving door, money, insider trading, and by money I mean, I think if we got rid of PAC and lobbyist contributions to members of Congress, that would be a massive, massive game changer, because immediately you would see how members of Congress spend their time would shift right away.
Right.
So instead of going to literally a breakfast, lunch, and dinner fundraisers with different groups of lobbyists representing different special interest groups, that's then time where maybe instead of calling lobbyists and saying, hey, how's it going? What do you care about? Can I have a check, please? They're calling their constituents back home and say, hey, how's it going? What do you care about? How can I help? And that would have a sizable shift. And then the second thing as it relates to money is, candidates, incumbents, you can get $2,900 maximum contribution. However, the political parties can get hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it creates this imbalance where the party leadership has so much leverage and ability to influence a rank and file member of Congress's position and vote, to where it completely intimidates a member of Congress from just being able to vote their conscience.
Yeah.
To where like, hey, no, this is where I stand on this issue. You've got all of this power and money with the party leadership that then come in and say, how dare you not stand with the party, or how dare you do this, and you do this, and we're not going to back you in your next election, and it puts that member in a tough spot.
I don't have time to flesh this out right now. I super disagree, but I understand that perspective. I've heard it a lot. I feel like during the Democratic primary, a lot of people were worried about the influence of billionaire money. Bloomberg was obviously talked about a lot. He did really well before he went to speak in those states, and then Steyer was another billionaire who ran on single issue for climate change. I feel like looking at how money is played out in our political system, sometimes it feels like it would be like a spend enough money and win. We've seen it happen with Nina Turner twice now too, where it doesn't always feel like the money translates in that one-to-one way. To where somebody spends a lot and they win. I do understand having the infrastructure, the party and everything. It is definitely important. I agree somewhat that there is a lot of like commonality between what Americans want. I do think there's a lot of genuine division though in terms of like how we get there. Like I think most Americans want people to be able to work and be happy and have a good job. Right. But people on the left will say maybe a federal jobs guarantee as part of the Green New Deal. People on the right will say, well, less regulation and business owners will come up and open businesses. Sometimes I think that we look for division in Congress, when in reality, I think a lot of the division comes from genuine divisiveness in the American population. I mean, we see it in the Roe v. Wade stuff, where that was supposedly settled law for 50 years, but like half the states are still ready to trigger laws to go in the other direction. So, but I mean that's a much deeper conversation, yeah. So you would get rid of lobbying and like...
Not getting rid of, you can't get rid of lobbying because people will always want to go and talk about whatever their issue of interest is, but it's the influence of those PAC and lobbyist contributions.
Yeah, and call them out. The people should know if, just using healthcare, Max Baucus, who was, derailing a lot of the stuff from Obamacare, is in the pockets of health insurance companies.
Have you heard of the NASCAR idea?
No.
I support that.
Oh.
you have like the stickers stitched on who's the donos or whatever.
That is what I am for.
And that's, so we're talking about politicians, but I've been advocating for the same kind of NASCAR concept for Washington think tanks because they come in as experts, whether it's on foreign policy or any other issue for that matter, healthcare and so on. They'll come and present themselves without actually revealing like, oh, you're talking about foreign policy, your think tank is funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE, and you're coming as an expert on the Middle East. How is that impacting or influencing what you're talking about?
Sure.
Are you speaking out against the country that's funding your think tank? Probably not. Same for healthcare.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I think we have like 2 more minutes. Cool. What, in terms of your panel tonight, what's the topic that you hope comes up or that you want to bring up?
I think the whole conversation about the media really speaks to influence and bias and how very few people trust the media anymore these days. And so having this conversation, I think, is going to be really interesting, especially with people who are going to be on the stage. I think the more people are a little bit more cynical with the information that they're seeing from any source, whether it's mainstream media, new media, Facebook, whatever, I think it's important for us to exercise our judgment and discernment and kind of make a decision like, okay, is this what it presents to be, or do I need to look into it more?
Gotcha. And then do you have you can plug one thing. What do you want to plug?
Plug my Instagram, Tulsi.
At Jamie Kilstein.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. There's so much fear. There's so much fear in our society right now. So many people feeling like they have to self-censor. We need to get back to being able to do what we're doing tonight, which is, hey, let's have conversations, civil discourse, treat each other with respect, and know that we can still walk away and disagree and still be friends.
And then you're doing a comedy show between one of the panels?
Yeah, so I'm doing stand-up. I'm going to go scorched fucking earth on stage and probably piss off people from both sides, but hopefully bring them together through laughter. It'll be a little bit of both. And that's it. I'm talking actually about a lot of this stuff, plus some pussy-eating jokes. So
cool. All right. And then where can
people
find you if they're looking?
I was going to ask you to plug my Instagram, but not after that.
I think I'm okay. At Tulsi Gabbard.
All right, cool. Well, hey, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Great to see you.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yep.